Afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much for joining us for this online session, Tracking and Tackling Emissions in Ports. We're really excited to be able to share with you our latest research on port decarbonisation that we have produced in partnership with Ericsson. Excuse me. And we're also really excited to be able to have a panel discussion with experts in both technology and sustainability from ports in the UK and also the US as part of this session. We've got an action-packed agenda, which I'll just take you through now. First, I'm going to, for the first 10 minutes or so, I will take you through our Powering Ports to Net Zero report, which is our framework for port decarbonisation. It's an enormous piece of research. It's about 50 odd pages. It's packed full of practical information and case studies, and critically, a framework for port decarbonisation that we really encourage all of you to take away, rip off and duplicate into your own organisations. I'll then be joined by an esteemed panel of experts where we'll discuss research findings and also discuss perhaps some of the practical nuances of achieving this stuff throughout a portable terminal. And finally, of course, as we always do, we'll open up the floor to audience Q&A. So it's absolutely critical that you get involved and ask your questions as they come in. I am recovering from a terrible cough, so apologies if I cough a little bit through this. We always find with these sessions is that no one asks any questions in the first 40 minutes, and then far too many people ask questions in the last 20 minutes for us to be able to effectively answer them. So by all means, if you think of a question you'd like to speak to either one of our panelists or have a question about the research that you want to direct to myself, there is a Q&A function in the bottom tray in the control panel for this Zoom. Pop your question in there, and we will do our very best to answer it through the course of the session. Well, without any further ado, I can see lots of people have come in to join the session, which is fantastic. So let's jump straight into the research. When we were commissioned by the Ericsson team to look at this question of port decarbonisation, we started it really with one core premise, and that's that if you've seen one port, you've seen one port. So the challenge was to create some kind of framework that could be universally applicable to ports wherever they are in the world, with whatever access to technology they've got, with whatever underlying infrastructure that's available, which is incredibly challenging because every port is unique. It doesn't matter whether they're ports that are next door to each other. Every port has their own quirks and their different management structures, and it's one of, for that reason, one of the most fascinating areas that we can look at. It's actually this question of how do you create a framework. But this is what we came up with. It's built in 3 steps. The first is that you need to have a really clear understanding of what the emissions profile for the port looks like. So that's that first step is actually about being able to detect emissions effectively in the first place, because you can't make any effective decision about how you're going to decarbonise or reduce your emissions until you've got a solid understanding of where those emissions are coming from. Second, you can then use that information to decide what are the most appropriate technologies or the most appropriate initiatives that you can use to reduce the emission profile of your port. And then finally, you have to go and, once you've decided on that, you have to go and deploy them and get those technologies out into the port, see that they start to have an impact, measure the successes and failures, because you definitely end up with both successes and failures, and that takes you all the way back around to detect again. So it is a continuous cycle of improving emissions, starting with understanding where you're actually at, then understanding what levers you can pull, and then finally getting on and doing it. So just taking each of those in turn, starting with the detect, you'll see on the screen here 2 quite different ports. That's the port of London, that's London Gateway, on the left-hand side, and in the middle, that's actually shore and port, not very far away from each other, but with two very, very different profiles in terms of where emissions may come from. On the Port of London, you've got very large vessels coming in to London Gateway Terminal, and you've got, in this instance, just looking at the container terminal, you've got the container cranes, container moving equipment, container handling equipment, and then also the hinterland connection. That's just one portion of the Port of London. Port of London is pretty huge, as we'll hear later. Port of Shoreham will have a very different emissions profile, much smaller vessels coming in, but for example, a much more broad base of tenants in the port that will have levels of sophistication in terms of how they are able to measure their emissions. So actually, whatever port you're in and whatever the setup is, whether it's a relatively simple operation like Shoreham or an incredibly complex operation like London, it's critical to start with that first inventory of getting an understanding of where your emissions are actually at. We identified 3 core ways in terms of deciding what technology to deploy. 3 core ways that you can reduce emissions. So the first is through smart technologies. So once you've got that emissions inventory complete, actually looking at what technologies are available to help you improve. Almost entirely, this is about operational efficiency. So reducing the amount of maintenance requirements, improving the way cargo moves through the port, improving the way hinterland connections work. We've estimated that the market for smart technologies in port is worth about $4 billion a year at the moment, but it's growing very, very quickly. We forecast to be worth just under $12 billion by 2029. So there's a huge opportunity to use smart technology to drive optimization of existing equipment, existing infrastructure. The second area we identified is around electrification of existing equipment and bringing in new electrified equipment. Actually, making that possible requires the ability to process data in real time, to develop some kind of smart grid that allows you to balance energy loads and detect faults and respond to operational needs as they change. But we see a major way to improve the emissions profile of a port is electrification of the equipment. And finally, the kind of holy grail, really, of lowering the emissions profile is actually be able to move to renewable energy sources. And we've seen that for various ports, although it's not possible for every port, for various ports there is enough land, either onshore or possibly even offshore, to be able to install renewable energy sources. A fantastic example of that is actually Portsmouth Port in the UK. They use all of the rooftops across the port estate to install roof-mounted solar panels, which now provide 35% of the site's electricity. So those 3 things together: smart technologies to optimize electrification of equipment, and then finally, the holy grail being renewable energy, are the key technological levers you can pull. Coming back to that final third area around actually deploying the technologies itself. Once you've got an understanding of where the emissions inventory is at, you've got an understanding of what technologies are available to you in your unique setup within your port. It's actually about going on the potentially quite long journey of deploying these technologies. The first step to that, as far as we see, is about actually assessing the current infrastructure needs and also creating some level of future proofing, so assessing the future infrastructure needs based on the technology, the technology you expect to deploy. Obviously, you'll have to build an investment case, and that's easier in some ports than in others, particularly trust ports where there is perhaps less of a commercial focus. The investment case can be built around something other than the financial ROI. But I would say even commercial ports are going to have to or are looking at this stuff quite seriously. Verifying technology claims is a really, really difficult one. And there's some advice in the report and case studies of where that's been done well in the reports. But it's really critical, particularly on the smart technologies, to be able to actually verify what it is the technology is supposed to be able to do, and whether it's been able to do it in a similar scenario. Phase the implementation. Don't just bite off a huge renewable energy project right at the start. There's always low-hanging fruit that you can go for. Absolutely critical is about engaging all of the port stakeholders, because there will always be stakeholders who are part of the port environment, and every port is so complex in terms of the number of stakeholders, whether they're tenants, whether it's terminals, whether it's port workboats, third-party service providers, agents, that they need to be sort of brought into the journey. And then finally, coming all the way back up to that detect again, actually make sure you're able and in a position to measure the success of those individual initiatives that you've taken on. Again, that comes back to having some level of granularity in terms of the way that you're measuring emissions, detecting emissions. There's a huge amount more to go into in terms of detail and in terms of case studies that we can on a session like this. So I would suggest to you, make sure you download the report. It will come into your inbox tomorrow if you've registered for this webinar. But we'll just run through some of the high-level recommendations that we are making to the port and terminal sector in terms of how to actually go about tackling this over and above the basic framework. So start with the lowest hanging fruit. They seem fairly obvious, but there's absolutely quick wins that are a relatively straightforward investment case, relatively low on capex, but can take significant chunks of the existing operating emissions of the port or terminal. Obviously, going for a huge renewable energy investment is something that needs to be factored into long-term planning, and is hugely important. But with the level of investment that's required to achieve that, there is definitely easier things that you can do faster to start bringing your emissions profile down. Second, form innovation partnerships. There's a huge amount of value that can be extracted by having innovation partnerships with the right technology suppliers. And those technology suppliers may or may not be operating in the port space already, but I would say that this is, or getting this right, requires an approach that is open to new technologies and new ideas. And there's a way to do that effectively. And I think we'll hear in the panel discussion about some of that stuff, but certainly getting those innovation partnerships put in place early doors is critical to be able to create some kind of long-term success. And then third, don't run before you can walk. Don't forget the basics. Actually getting the right infrastructure in place is probably the most important first step to all of this. And some of that infrastructure will be to support things like electrification. Some of that infrastructure will be to support things like being able to transmit data effectively across the port. If you can't get those basics put in place to allow you just in the first instance to start properly detecting emissions, then it's very, very difficult to make sound judgment calls on what you need to do for the long term going forward. So absolutely start with the basics, start with getting the right infrastructure in place to sort of set you up on a bit of a foundation. As I said, I would absolutely recommend going to download the research. There's a huge amount more to it than I can do justice for in 15 minutes. It goes live tomorrow. But in the meantime, I'm really pleased to say we've got a panel of experts from across the port space. So Kathy, Ian, Stephen, and Amal. Could I ask you to bring yourself on screen? And we'll run some introductions, and we'll perhaps as a starting point, it would be great to just hear your initial thoughts on the research, and also just a bit of a background to yourself, the organisation you work for, and how you've ended up where you are today. Kathy, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hello. My name is Kathy Vick, and I'm the Chief Development and Public Affairs Officer for the Port of Virginia. So mid-Atlantic port here in the United States. And one of the departments that I have the pleasure of leading is our sustainability team. We do have a target to get to net zero by 2040. And I was so delighted to read this research and to see that we are already doing a lot of the things and following these best practices. And the path forward that we're on seems to also be consistent. So you know, when we look at the detect, decide, deploy, we did just that. We did a full emissions inventory. Here in the United States, we have an EPA emissions predictor, right? And we took each class of asset and did it separately. And now looking at smart technologies, right, we are looking at in our next inventory to add sensors for that real-time data to validate the emissions tool that we've been using. So excited to see that. Decide, we'll have an opportunity, I think, during this webinar to show you some decisions that we made and what went into those, where that low-hanging fruit was that we've already achieved. For instance, we already have 116 all-electric rail-mounted gantry cranes that are running our yard. We're about to implement 56 more. That replaced all traditional diesel straddle carriers that were our main conveyance in the field. We didn't have an all-electric solution for shuttles, so we have 103 hybrids, and we're looking at what's the next step for that. Just some examples of the decision and the deployment. And then as we move forward, I'll tell you some other things that we're doing to continue to evaluate life cycle costs, maintenance costs, proven technologies, where we can test and deploy, where we can partner with others. I'm just excited to talk to you. We're doing scope 1, 2, and 3. And so as we dig in, I'm excited to learn from you all, but also let you know what we're doing. And Eloise, already active questions. We do report our emissions. We have an annual report. You'll see a lot of ports starting to do that. portofvirginia.com. You can go take a look.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kathy. And great to hear how much has been done in a relatively short space of time by you and your team. Stephen, why don't you go next and tell us a bit about the Port of London?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Kathy. I'm Stephen Clapton, and I look after the operational part of the Port of London Authority. I'll get onto the PLA shortly, but just sort of reflecting on the report. So it's a really interesting model, and it's obviously similar to the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle that we also undertake as we run our businesses day to day. But key in all of that is the Plan, Do, Check, Act review cycle, yeah, to make sure that whatever you're doing is then having the impact that you expect to have. Another interesting point I thought was what came through strongly was there is no one size fits all model, and we do all think that our report is unique and nobody else can possibly run the report in the same way that we do. But there's definitely a lot of commonality there, and the report recognises that and then gives a roadmap for sort of creating connectivity and data. One of the things that you might hear me saying as we get further through this on our route to decarbonisation. And I think also thereafter it's very much for the individual ports to try and identify the opportunities and the use cases within their business. So I would encourage everybody to take the time to review the report, see which parts of it are applicable to their own business. I'm not going into too much detail about what we have done in the PLA recently, and perhaps that can come out in the discussions later on. But a bit of background to who we are. We're the largest port in the UK, and we're based in the capital city. And we've got a real mix of areas. We look after 95 miles of tidal Thames. We start off away out the estuary at the North Sea, and we go up through the capital of the city up to West London. So a mix of very urban and very industrial areas. Lots of highly motivated stakeholders is a polite way to describe it all. But therefore you wouldn't find a more stakeholder-focused port than the PLA. So 2022, we did a strategy refresh. We conducted 130 in-person and online events. And our strategy is very much delivered for the stakeholders. So the board and the exec, it's not our business, it's the stakeholders' business. They tell us how they want us to run their port on their behalf. And we're a trust port, but we operate on a very commercial basis. And trust port model in the UK for international guests, that's very much an independent organisation run for the benefit of stakeholders. So it's stakeholder benefit as opposed to shareholder value. But we all operate on a commercial basis. We turn a surplus and we reinvest it back into the business. The benefit of that, and there is the pros and cons of every ownership model, but the benefit of the trust port model is it allows for very long-term decision making, and decision making that can be made on the benefit of impact, not necessarily just revenue or growth. At the PLA, we've committed to net zero by 2040, same as Cathy, and that's in the face of quite significant growth forecasts over the next 25 years. So we currently do around about 52 to 55 million tonnes of cargo. We expect that to grow to somewhere between 75 and 95 million tonnes. Being in the capital, a lot of passenger journeys. So pre-COVID, that was about 10 million. It's now bouncing back somewhere close to that, and that will grow to about 20 million journeys. And we've got an interesting intraport light freight model. Currently, that's about 3.5 million tonnes, but that will double by 2050. So we've got an increasing activity, and we've got the need to decarbonise our own operations, but also support our customers and stakeholders in decarbonising their operations. So we take a very much a leadership position in decarbonising on the Thames. And we're lucky that, for all I said, we've got these highly motivated stakeholders. They're also very positive, very supportive. We've got a great customer base, really brilliant vessel operators and river users, and everybody's of a similar mindset. So it's a very supportive environment on the Thames. And that's probably enough for me, I think, Nick.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephen. It's fascinating. Ian, why don't you go next to round off the ports?
Thanks very much, Nick, and hello to everyone joining us. And thank you to Mr. Clapperton for describing what a trust port model is. That saves me the job doing that as well. So Port of Tyne is also a trust port. So yes, the stakeholders, the local community, all very much at the heart of what we do. Long-term planning for the region, wanting to build the port and hand it on to future generations in a better state than we found it. We developed in direct relation to Maritime 2050 our own 30-year plan, which is Tyne 2050, which is aligned with the Maritime 2050 principles, but slightly more ambitious in its targets. So, for example, we've set a target to be net zero by 2030 and all electric by 2040. And well on the way to achieving those. We've got numerous decarbonisation projects ongoing. I will hold my hands up to everybody in the room. I'm the IT geek in the room, so I'm from the innovation technology side of the business rather than the environmental sustainability side of the business. So I'm the one championing 5G, data collection, IoT use cases. When Nick mentioned earlier the low-hanging fruit around renewable energy, I think there's probably even a quicker win there, and that's around data. So I've always championed the three pillars for productivity and moving forward, and those are connectivity, which is the 5G aspect that we've got within the Port of Tyne now. But the key thing in the middle of that's data. We need to know what we're doing now, and that's part of the detect action that Nick mentioned earlier. We need to find out where the problem is, where the issues are. So we've done a huge amount of work analysing our current fleet, our buildings. We've done all the basic, the quick wins. We've got smart meters installed everywhere. We've converted all our lights into LED. We've run an HVO trial with our plant and equipment in the HDV fleet, and that was hugely successful. We're going to go live with HVO on the truck fleet in April, and then we'll roll that forward into the quayside equipment in 2025. What we've managed to do with the infrastructure that we've got, we're now managing to pull the unstructured data from across the business to build dashboards, for want of a better phrase, to be able to pull that information so that the operational managers within the business have got real-time information around how their actions affect the emissions, how they affect the throughput of the port. So we're now starting to make data-led decisions rather than 30 years of gut instinct decisions, which is a huge move away from where we have been previously. So now we have CO2 dashboards. We know in the container terminal, for example, if we're doing unnecessary dig outs, how that affects fuel consumption, how that affects emissions. And we've got some projects coming up later this year where we're actually going to start to fit IoT sensors to the plant and machinery so we can track and trace the movements around sites. We can start to optimize the fleet, reduce unnecessary movements, reduce unnecessary idling. Start to optimize the fleet. Do we have too many forklifts? Do we have too many plants? Can we reduce? And can we move things around site more efficiently? And we'll do emissions checking as well as we're doing that as well. So there's lots of really exciting, innovative use cases to come around around data collection, data analysis, and the big buzzword at the minute that everyone's talking about is digital twins. So if you can bring that information to light, use it, harness it, plan scenarios through it, then that's just going to be better for all of us. And I'll wave the flag for the Innovation Hub at the Port of Tyne as well. We're all about sharing our information. We have no interest in circling the wagons and keeping our information, our learnings to ourselves. We want to make sure that everybody improves together for the greater good of the UK port sector and the global port sector. So I'd encourage everybody out there to share your ideas, share your wins, share your failures as well, because there's learning there as well.
I think that last one is critical, actually, sharing the failings. I don't think we do enough of that as an industry generally. Last but by no means least, Amar, you're here really as a representative of the tech sector rather than the port sector. So why don't you give us an introduction to yourself and to Ericsson, and also your impressions of the research.
No, I mean, thank you very much. No, we believe in the research. My name is Ammar, and I'm part of Ericsson private network team, Enterprise Wireless Solutions. I'm based in Dallas, Texas, and I've been engaged with ports for the past 10 to 15 years. First, on Ericsson, I mean, we are very committed to sustainability. So before we go into technical, and we have committed to reduce the emission across our company value chain by 90% by 2040. So it seems 2040 is a magical number. A lot of us are committed. And then we are committed to be net zero across our value chain, by 2050. So we are working on that, and that's from the levels of 2020. But and we have been recognized by Davos in 2024 as a top global 100 listed, unveiled by corporate nights in Davos, Switzerland. So we have been really focusing on this because of our background and our commitment to the SDGs, numbers and stuff. As a technology, we are just an enabler. So we have listened to our partners and customers to see what are the use cases that the team has mentioned. Before 2020, a lot of the use cases were about connected workers, asset condition monitoring, and stuff. But more after 2020, we have seen a lot of push on sustainability from the innovation teams, and corporate commitment of the ports authorities and terminals. So we have developed some solutions, our partners in Port of Livorno, like digital twin over 5G network, to collect all the assets and to see the impact. And the impact was reduction of 10 to 15% of emissions. And now we are working with, so we are an enabler, a technology enabler, but we believe the 5G platform or the private network platform enables the IT and the innovation teams to build on it, whether it's asset condition monitoring, emission monitoring, and digital twin, enhanced operation. And the impact is now when we measure the return on investment, we are not measuring it only in money, how much business, but also we can measure it with the impact on the sustainability targets of the industry. Glad to be here, and we love to see some of our customers and more customers partnering with us to achieve their goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Ammar. To kick the discussion off, I'd really love actually to come to Ian, if I may, just building on what Ammar was saying there about 5G as an enabler. And obviously, I know Port of Tyne has had some experience in rolling out 5G, as you mentioned. Looking at that first pillar, if you like, detect. It sounds like with what you're building out, a digital twin, dashboards to be able to see emissions in real time, it sounds like you're quite far along the journey in terms of actually building out that full detect infrastructure in the Port of Tyne. Is that right?
We've definitely started the journey. I wouldn't say we're far along. The 5G network came online towards the back end of last year, so now we're looking to build use cases. Some of the other work streams that we've done around emissions monitoring, we've been able to do with conventional technology, either on 4G or internal Wi-Fi. But we, as Amar said earlier, we see 5G being the enabler. 5G in itself doesn't give you anything apart from a nice piece of infrastructure. It's the data you can pull across the network, and then what you do with the data. So it's the data analysis, the data scientists that will help pull that information, and building a robust IoT ecosystem to make sure that you're collecting the right data at the right time, and ideally be able to report that back to the business in real time is fantastic. The main driver for all of us is to be faster, better, cheaper. You know, we want to do more with less. So things like just optimizing vehicle routes and fuel utilization would be fantastic. As a port, just one example, we know how much fuel we use on a weekly basis, but at the minute we don't know what that fuel is used for once it's taken from tank to vehicle. So fitting the vehicles with sensors, we can see the routes, we can start to plot heat maps around it, we can assign fuel costs to vessels and other operations, and then we can start to break it down to see where the non-efficient areas of the port are, and we focus on this. So it gives you the tool set to help make informed decisions.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think that getting that base infrastructure in place first is that kind of critical first step. Kathy, how did you manage the detect part of the equation at the Port of Virginia? Because I know you've kind of gone down the emissions inventory kind of route in the past. Is that right?
We have, and as I mentioned earlier, we used the EPA emissions tool, and we did it by asset class. And to Ian's point, where we were able to use sensors, and we were able to identify the average amount of diesel being used per gallon, you know, like so many gallons per hour. And then when we're then modeling life cycle costs in the future of electric or hybrid, or we just completed a hydrogen study looking at whether a hydrogen fuel cell would make us just as fast, right? Cheaper is important, and then also greener. So I'll add that to Ian's analysis, right? But having the 5G network has allowed us to put in some tools like the sensors. We do have a digital twin where we can do some modeling. We have a berthing tool that's helping us. Really, the berthing tool is more optimizing use of the berth, so you have less idling time by the vessels. And then also a truck reservation system that's gotten our turn times inside the terminal for our motor carriers down to just over 30 minutes. So you don't have the truck idling time as they're queuing at the gate, because we're able to get them in and out more efficiently by having them reserve the night before and then using the rail mounted gantry cranes to what we call groom the stacks at night. It's almost, they play Tetris and they line them up in the order that they're going to be picked out the next day, so that when the truck comes in, it's ready to go. You're not having double picks in order to get the container that they need, which has really been a tremendous support in helping. When we look at that calculation, though, going back to your initial question and some of the intrigue in the question box, we made the conscious decision to just start with, and this goes back to your low-hanging fruit, right? Just start with what we can control. So only our scope 1 is what we've inventoried so far. So that's all of our container handling equipment, the vehicles that are operating around the terminal, the ship to shore cranes, our facilities that we manage, whether it's a warehouse or an office building and so forth. All of the sort of outside the gate or on the water, that's scope 3 for us. So we've not done an inventory of that yet, but we have put in programs like the truck reservation system. We have a green operator program that provides funding for motor carriers to upgrade their engines or to convert to an alternative fuel. So we're doing some things to help facilitate reduction, but we're not measuring that. We're leaving it to those folks to do their own inventory and hit their own targets in scope 3 while being a facilitative partner.
Really glad you've mentioned the emission scopes there, because I think that's a really important piece of the conversation that often gets overlooked. And in theory, if everyone looks after their own scope 1, scope 2, then there's no problems. But in reality, I think it's important that we at least start to have an idea of what is going on with scope 3. And Stephen, I know that's something that you've looked at in London, sort of through vessel traffic services and things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, we're one of a small number of ports globally that plan to include vessel emissions within the port within our own scope 3. It's a sort of, there's quite a, I wouldn't say a divisive issue, but there's certainly two separate schools of thought. And we've been running a port air quality strategy in the Port of London for a good number of years now. I think there's one of the questions around accessing them. So again, they're available on our website. I think our 2018 and 2020 emissions inventories and emissions strategy are published on the website. But more recently, we've partnered with RightShip, who some people on the call may know. And RightShip have built us a bespoke maritime emissions portal. And this gives us sort of accurate modelling, measurement, identification of the source of air quality impacts across the full 95 miles of the tidal Thames. And that's at all stages of the voyage for us. Now, that's fairly critical because vessel emissions they vary depending on what they're up to. So that's arrival, transit, manoeuvring, and alongside. And that gives us very easy, accurate identification of the hotspots where we might want to make interventions. Because when we look back to our previous air quality strategies, we've made a number of interventions, so economic incentives, green port tariffs, Thames Green Scheme for inland shipping, and we've done some trials and demonstrations, and we've got some mitigation measures. But it's been based on sort of model data, which there's an awful lot of assumptions in it. So now we're getting a lot more confident about the data that we're putting into the modelling. And I think you touched on our vessel traffic services stuff as well. So another big project that we're running at the moment is called our Marine Centre Transformation Programme. And it's effectively about changing the working environment within the port, modernising and consolidating our traffic management functions, replacing the VTS system and building all that in a new energy efficient operation centre. But the biggest prize in all of that is when you start to think about linking these systems together. So if we could potentially at some point link the RightShip portal to our new VTS system, we could in the first instance simulate or evaluate the impact of slowing down, speeding up, or keeping alongside vessels and see what the impact of that was on the emissions relative to the voyage within the port. Obviously be mindful that safety and navigation effectively trumps everything. So that always takes primacy for us in the Port of London. So it's really interesting, and we're going to, at the same time as that, we'll see increasing amounts of automation coming through the port, uncrewed vessels, alternative fuels, and they're all going to need a slightly different way of management through the port. And I think just it all comes back full circle to what the other colleagues on the panel have been saying. It all needs more technology, more data, and improved connectivity, which I think is one of the sort of fundamentals coming through in the report.
I can see lots of questions coming in on the Q&A, which is great. We'll move over to the Q&A questions in about 5 minutes. Sorry, but before we do, Amar, Stephen was just talking about this whole question about actually getting all of your data together into one place, sort of effectively building out a digital twin that can support the right operational decision making, but also long-term planning. And I know that's an area you've got a lot of experience in. But I think we potentially, just to take advantage of the fact that we've got you here, I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know the difference really between 4G and 5G private networks, public networks. It would be great if you could just give us a bit of an explainer for that, because I think that would help a lot of people understand how ports like London, Tyne and Virginia have pulled this infrastructure piece together.
No, my pleasure. I mean, first, let's talk about public network versus private network. So public network is for consumers, is what we use to communicate, to traffic and, social media. But when it comes to industries and, like critical infrastructure industries like ports, you cannot have your information going on a public network. You really want to control all your assets, all the traffic that goes on the network to be local. So a private network means the core and the radio is owned by the port authority. So that means they can provision subscribers, they can stream videos across multiple cameras without being charged per bits or things like that. And the most important thing is cybersecurity. So this is a secure network more than, and it is a licensed spectrum versus the Wi-Fi or, LoRa or others. So that's where the driver becomes important, of a private network. So that's the private network. 4G, 5G, we see around 50-50 use cases running on 4G and 5G. So the important thing I would say here, I don't want to push either technology, is to have a future-proof technology. So now, after 10 years or 12 years of 4G network being launched, the 5G becoming really mature and more features, I see it more fit a little bit for ports. And the use cases, I'll tell you, ports has a lot of metallic infrastructure. They have big cranes. They want to monitor the trucks. They want to monitor indoor and outdoor. So the 5G is better fit for this. They can have position location up to 30 centimeters for indoor and 50 centimeters outdoor. You can have a high density of sensors sending data to the radio. And when you are talking about digital twin, that's really very important because you want the more connected assets you have, the cranes, the trucks, the wheels, the space, the RFIDs that are usually done for AGVs, the better image you get. And especially when we are talking about dynamic digital twin. Dynamic digital twins means a virtual image of, a virtual reality video streaming as what it is in the field. So for the network operators, the authorities, and all the partners that are running cranes and trucks and forklifts, they need to see exactly what's happening, what's being utilized. And when you click on it, immediately you get all the maintenance records and all the spare parts that are available on that facilities. So that's where 5G is more fit. But 4G is very good for sensors, for people tracking, assets tracking, mobile assets, and stuff like this. But the other thing I've seen some ports doing is kind of, as Kathy was saying, that she wants to know also what's happening outside the port, because a port is like a small city. You have logistic hub, you have environmental, you have trucks coming in, people, and there is hazards and stuff. So with a private network, you could have your own private whenever it's inside. When you go outside, you tap into the public network. So you can track the trucks, track the containers, even offering it as a special services, all the way until it reaches the final destination. So this is the beauty of a cellular network for inside and outside.
Thank you, Amar. That's really interesting. Stephen, did you mention me? I think you may want to. You have a question related to cybersecurity.
I do. Thanks. Yeah, it's a question for Amar and possibly Ian as a technologist. Cyber is obviously a key concern for the sector, and the more we talk about data and connectivity, the more of a concern it gets. We know the cyber threat is very real. We've seen attacks on the shipping lines and on a number of major ports and terminals. And as we progress our mitigation measures, so the cyber security threat increases to chase up, doesn't it? So it's very much at the top of most organisations in the maritime sector risk registers. I'm just so we talk about private 5G networks and then linking into external networks. I'm just interested in panel members' thoughts on how we maintain cybersecurity in the face of increasing use of data and connectivity.
Ian, I'll let you talk from practice. I will talk from theory.
Yes, Stephen, I completely agree with you. I think there's a real increased risk of cybersecurity incidents as we start to expand the remit of the physical network, especially when we start to include legacy equipment like quayside equipment, cranes, conveyors. The more connectivity, the bigger the threat landscape, the opportunity for somebody to breach the systems is real. And the thing to understand is we can put as many layers on as possible, but ultimately we need to act as a deterrent. As we build new systems from the ground up and start to test new technologies, we need to be building in security from design. It can't be an afterthought. It's got to be part of the initial planning stages, and we need to make sure that everything is secure by design. We need to segment the networks so we can start to isolate. So if we get a breach, it doesn't spread across the full network. That can be done by VLANs, air gapping physical networks, multiple ways of doing that. The key thing for me is regular testing. You can do red teaming exercises. We can bring third-party companies in to do security analysis. We need to make sure that security is at the absolute forefront. It cannot be an afterthought.
Okay, I mean, I'll answer from, I mean, the way we do it is two ways. That's, you know, we have security physical SIM cards, so we don't use eSIM in our private network. So it's physically locked to the user or to the assets. And if it has also geofencing, the minute it leaves the facilities, it's disconnected. And then you have the ability to do VLANs or a prior, you know, quality of service. So if it's a machine to machine versus a human being versus remote crane operation, you know, streaming videos and having time sensitive, that's what we focus on. The other thing is any device that we bring on our network or application, we test it in our labs. And we test it with Ian's team in an innovation or a POC environment. And we do some hardening and some trying to hack into the network. We have not seen, I mean, we have over like 400, 500 networks being installed or installed live. And we have not seen any attacks on these networks. And the same network we provide for mission critical, you know, MOD and MOI. So it is very secure, but your environment also, as we started, is different. So we continue. I mean, the most important person in our organization are the security team. And they are the first discussion of anybody says, I mean, yesterday we had a discussion with a big oil and gas company in the UK, by the way. And the IT managers, the OT team, all excited. But somebody came and they brought the security head, and security head, let's discuss it. We spent 2 hours and they were satisfied. They said, okay, now I can give the go ahead. So it is important. We have documents on it and we have test procedures. And it is important for you to really start the planning for different processes and different procedures for the IT team before the technology comes, because it will have an impact on the way you do things, because it's a really a new advanced technology.
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Nick, if I could just jump in addition to,
Pushkin.
we do have a lot of those protocols in place, thanks to Ericsson, helping build our system. But additionally, we do regular exercises, and we invite partners here in the US, like the Coast Guard and the FBI and our emergency response team. So I think collaboration with other partners who can help once an incident does occur, we are able also on our system to isolate off where the penetration occurred to stop it from going, right? And we've had a couple of times where an external partner like our labor union's payroll system or a shipping line's billing system was attacked, and we were able to immediately isolate and make sure that there was not penetration. The other big thing is regular training of your colleagues within your organization, because a lot of times the way an attacker gets in is actually through penetrating your system by someone who's a trusted user. So we do regular phishing exercises, and if they fall for it, we have a remediation training where they have to go and sit in a 4-hour training on ways it can occur and impacts it can have, just to make them more mindful, right? Because there are lots of vulnerabilities that people don't even think of. And then finally, we have set up a cybersecurity operations center that can be used by our colleagues, but also our federal and state emergency response partners in the case of an incident that's remote from any of our locations. But we were able to set that up and have it fully funded so it can be operational.
I think all of that is a really important reminder that even though we're talking about emissions, we're dealing with critical infrastructure, and it's absolutely important to get these sort of security fundamentals right, no matter what it is you're trying to achieve. But moving on from that kind of tech question and looking at the decide and business cases, the question here from the audience, which Kathy, we'll stick with you if that's okay. I'll send it your way. In terms of the investment case for green shipping, do ports consider or calculate the potential loss of trade if the right kind of infrastructure is in place for shipping customers, for example, shore power or non-fossil fuel bunkering, etc.? What are your thoughts?
So that was an interesting question that I saw in the chat. It may be a little different for me actually than the European ports, because you all have some very specific regulations that you all have to target. We don't. And so what we do is, because we're doing it for the right reason. And so when we look at it, we actually see it as a competitive advantage as we're listening to our shipping customers and our beneficial cargo owner customers, that we're achieving the same targets that they are. We are their scope 3, right? And so when they're looking across their supply chain end to end, and we're right in the middle of it, we see it as a competitive advantage, the steps that we're taking. One thing that we don't have in place yet on the vessel side is we don't currently offer any shore power or alternative fuel bunkering, but it is something that we're assessing as the shipping lines are starting to comply with IMO regulations. The biggest challenge for us is which fuel is going to win, right? So we can prepare for LNG, we can prepare for ammonia, we can prepare for methanol, but until we see some consistency. So part of our hydrogen study, you all know that you can add some synthetics to hydrogen in order to create ammonia or methanol. So we're looking at, if we put an electrolyzer in place on terminal, could we scale it up in the future if we see the demand for one of those other fuels? And then one of the other departments that I have within our port is emergency response. So we're already starting to evaluate what that means from a preparedness and response standpoint if we were to offer those alternative fuels in our port. So I kind of flipped your question on its head. Yes, we do think about the economic impacts, but maybe a little bit differently on the East Coast of the United States.
And I think it's really important, because ports are not just trying to decarbonize their own operations. Ports are effectively going to be the facilitators of decarbonizing all of shipping as well, which is a big challenge to take on. Ian, question for you. Despite all the initiatives and efforts many ports, especially the panel here, doing to reduce emissions, how are you dealing with the many external hurdles that impose constraints and limits on what ports would like to do? So one example here, I won't read the whole question, but one example is about the implementation of shore power. It's always considered key, but actually one of the limitations is around, can the grid support it? How do you go about, when you're making these decisions about where to invest in infrastructure, making sure you take those limitations into account?
This one isn't particularly my wheelhouse, but I'll give it a go answering. I think for us as the Port of Tyne, we are fundamentally considering our own operations. Obviously, there are lots of constraints around us, the vessels, the supply chain. What we want to do is get our own house in order first, and then once that's down to the levels that we want, then we'll start looking at the supply chain look at the shipping operations. Some of that will come down to government legislation as well around vessel management, green taxes, those kind of things. But for us, we're concentrating on what we can affect ourselves. So in-house first, and then we'll move that out later once we've hit the targets that we want to hit for ourselves. Sorry, that was a very generic answer.
No, it's helpful. And Stephen, what's the picture in London? Because I imagine it's very complex and lots of limitations in London.
It is, yeah. And I mentioned earlier the sort of 95 miles. We sort of, for ease of brain power, we tend to break it into kind of 3 segments. So the first 1/3 is predominantly commercial. So that's where we see the sort of 300-400 meter container ships in and out. The middle part is a lot of passenger operations. At the top end, it's a lot of leisure. And the sort of needs and expectations of the user groups, be that shipping lines versus passenger transport versus more leisure users, are markedly different in each of the 3 sectors. And picking up on Kathy's point earlier, which fuel will win out? Well, you know, we don't know. So our working assumption is that there will be a mix of various different fuels. Well, I thought the Class Societies did a fantastic job in all their maritime forecasts at the back end of last year, although fantastic in isolation, but they all had a different view on what the future would look like. And there were some really interesting nuggets in there about small-scale nuclear, which, you know, I guess you pay for your fuel and capex. You don't need to bunker when you're in port for the life of the vessel, but, you know, what does the regulatory framework look like, and how would that work from a public perception point of view? So we're working through a process just now to try and pull all these various different information sources together and get one sort of single, fairly well-informed view of what the future of the Port of London will look like from an alternative fuels point of view. And shore power will absolutely be in the mix there, but I think it's unlikely to be in the mix for the large commercial vessels in the short term, but it's absolutely in the mix in the middle district, the central part, for passenger transport operations. And there's a number of very well developed, very well supported projects underway at the moment. In the UK, our government have got a number of funding pots and initiatives. So through 2025 to 2028, there's quite a number of demonstrators. And just picking out a couple of examples, then we've got an electric cargo transport vessel, which will be operating over about a 20-mile range, you know, so sort of picking up from the big logistics distribution centres, taking it up into central London, and then ideally the last mile delivery is via electric cargo bike. So that's sort of decarbonising that whole logistics supply chain. Back down at our end, we're lucky enough to be partnering in an uncrewed hydrogen-fueled survey vessel, and we'll have that for exploitation across that 3-year period. So again, we're sort of trialling these alternative fuels from a sort of management point of view, but also from the safety case. So it's interesting times. We look at what commercial shipping are doing. We think, how will that work from a safety case, operational, and productivity point of view? You look at, you know, Maersk as one of the large carriers, and one of our big customers are going heavily on buying up e-methanol all around the world. And we've already had one port call from their methanol fueled container vessel. I think Singapore did an awful lot of work on trialling the bunkering out there. So yeah, interesting times, but no one answer, we don't think.
We actually,
Yeah, Nick, if I can...
Oh, go on, Kathy, go for it.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to jump in on the electric shore power piece of that. It is important, as Steve mentioned, to really, for us, it's a regulated utility system. For you all, maybe the city, right? But helping them, we've worked very closely with our utility provider to model not just where we are today, but as we continue to electrify, and if we see what future load we might add with things like electric shore power, to model with them. We've actually already put our own substation on one of our terminals in order to isolate us a little bit from upstream. And now, as we continue to forecast, we're looking at adding an additional high voltage line from the regional grid system into that substation. So again, to support our own load. And in addition, we signed a power purchase agreement to take electricity from 4 dedicated solar facilities. Combined, they produce about 345 megawatts of power. We don't need all of that. We negotiated for a percentage, but also to help understand where our power is coming from. I think we're the only one that's on 100% clean electricity now from a combination of renewables. And so that's also, we haven't really talked about scope 2 much, but that's part of it too, right? What's behind the meter and where is that power coming from? How is it sourced and how's that impacting emissions? Yes, but also pricing for our customers, because we were able to do it at a negotiated rate as well that can be passed on if we're providing that power to others.
I think that close collaboration between whoever runs the grid in whatever country you're in, or state you're in, I think is super important, because this stuff requires quite careful planning. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I wish we could carry on. There's more questions that we haven't been able to answer. 2 I'll answer very briefly. One is, how can we access the report? We'll get it by email tomorrow. If you don't get it, head to our website tomorrow and you'll see a link to download it. And 2, is it being recorded? Yes, it is. We'll also send out a link to the recording. Just in fact, a 30-second summary from each of you. I'd love to hear what would be your one takeaway piece of advice you'd want to give to a portal terminal operator who's thinking about this stuff. Stephen, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Well, pulling out one of the points in the report on partnerships, and we said at the start that we all think we're unique, and perhaps we are, but none of us act in isolation. Somebody far cleverer than me used to talk about the triple helix model, and this was industry, academia, and government working closely in partnership. And for us as a stakeholder organisation, that collaborative and interdependent relationship works very well as we try and get us from where we are just now through 2040 through to achieve our 2050 objectives. And that's very much about fostering innovation, the port as an economic engine for growth and community benefit, and then the wider societal benefit that goes with that.
Okay.
Fantastic. Amar?
I mean, for me, I just have 2 comments. One is, as Stephen was talking, I mean, it is an economical driver. So 2 things to focus on. There is a lot of stakeholders in the port, and that's what we have seen. It's not the IT manager, it's a security team, it's an authority. So it's very important to align, because that will provide synergy, justifying the investment and, and achieving. And that's the second thing, is the goals, is to have a vision. So when the port has a vision, then everything trickles down. Sustainable port, we love to engage with. There's our ports that they want to be smart for the sake of smartness. Fine. I mean, that we can do, as long as they have a vision and then it's trickling down to technology and to procedures. Thank you.
Ian?
Yeah, just some high-level things from me. Data is key as far as I'm concerned. We need to understand the extent of the problem before we can go anywhere to fix it. So we need to be able to enable the data gathering. We need to look at what we're doing now so we can make future plans and be better. Collaboration. It's an overused phrase, so forgive me. We can be smarter if we work together. We're not ports in isolation. We're an industry that can help each other to move forward. And green fuels wise, if anybody out there has got the answer to the green fuels conundrum, please let us know, because we're all struggling with that one.
Fully agree. And Kathy?
I want to go back to something you said at the very beginning that we didn't really touch on much, but don't run before you can walk, and don't forget the basics. I think a lot of what we've heard today is just that, right? Get that infrastructure and that framework in place that will set you up for success in the future. Sometimes technology is not keeping pace with our desire. So don't throw good money after bad, right? Do pilots, test, give feedback to the manufacturers, talk to Ian said this at the very start, share your successes and your failings. Let's learn from each other, right? So we can make each other better. And just like I was talking about with the utilities, same thing with our shipping lines, our motor carrier customers, the more we understand about what your vision is and how you're hoping to hit your target. Our targets are the same, right? Net zero by 2040. A lot of us said that. How are you planning to get there so that we can help, and vice versa? So I think that that really sums it up, right? Let's take it step by step, build a foundation, help each other, and we'll get there.
Fantastic. What a great place to end. I think from my perspective, all I'd say is building on all of that, is that I think there are definitely no silver bullets. It's a really complex and quite challenging area, but there is a lot of low-hanging fruit, and a lot of that just comes down to getting that detect infrastructure in place to start with, and actually understanding where the levers are that you can pull. And I fully agree. Share the success is great, but also definitely share the failures, because it helps everyone. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Kathy, Stephen, Ian, and Amar. Thank you to our partners, Ericsson, for actually commissioning this research and making it possible. As I said, check your emails for links to this recording, links to the research. Please get in touch, share your successes and failures with us, and we'll absolutely come around again to have another discussion. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for such fascinating and engaging questions, and we'll do it all again sometime soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nick and Leah. Appreciate you both.
Bye.